Needless to say, India is an exquisite land of exquisite cuisines and exquisite art and some dishes that are truly exquisite. From cities that are truly exquisite. Well, the city is Lucknow, and for the dish, I'll see you on the other side. Welcome to India in 21 Recipes with me, Ranveer Brar. Well, the city is my city, the city of Lucknow, and the dish is a bread called Sheermal. Every city has their version of a Sheermal. Sheer means milk, mal means rich. So basically a rich milk-based bread is called a Sheermal. The Lucknowi version has a very interesting story to it that I'll talk to you about. But you get this in Lahore, you get this in Hyderabad, you get this in Delhi with a slight change recipe. This one is typically Lucknowi. I've changed it a little bit because classically it's supposed to be made in iron tandoor, which we obviously don't have at home. So I'm going to slightly tweak it so you could make it in your oven. We'll take approximately 1 part flour. If I had to break down the recipe, I normally say recipes are never about measurements. They're always about proportions, right? So once you understand the proportion of a recipe, then everything becomes easy. Now to this, we add powdered sugar. A Sheermal has to be slightly sweet, salt, and while we're doing this, let's activate the yeast. Here goes the yeast. Warm water, not hot, but warm water. A little bit of sugar, not too much. Too much sugar or salt can kill the yeast, right? So be mindful, don't put too much. A little bit of milk and a little bit of flour. Now what you've done is you've created a sort of a starter for yeast. You would leave this at a warm place. The yeast is first going to dissolve and then it is going to start getting active. Now whether you're using dry yeast or you're using fresh yeast, the activation works the same way. However, the quantities get reduced to half when you're using dry yeast. So if you're using fresh yeast, double the quantity, dry yeast, half the quantity. And the reason you're adding sugar and you're adding flour is because you want to feed the yeast, right? Now what happens is when you're feeding the yeast becomes active. So the sugar in the flour is food for yeast. That's the most essential and the most basic way to explain what a starter is. A little bit of baking soda. Very little baking powder. Again, you can completely avoid the baking powder, but sometimes we work in colder temperatures, especially rich breads like Sheermal, they had during winters. And during winters, the temperature is not optimum for the fermentation to occur sometimes. And the rise, because of the yeast, is usually slightly less. And that's why you add a tad bit of baking powder to ensure that whatever rise does not come because the yeast is there because the baking powder. It's as simple as that. And what I've done is, as you can see, I've added all the dry ingredients together and all the wet ingredients separately. The most basic thing to do when you're baking, I'm adding a little bit of milk powder, is take all your dry ingredients, mix them, and then add your wet ingredients. You could also sift all your dry ingredients together. Put them in a sifter. If you have a channi at home, put them in your channi. Just sift them together. That way as they get mixed evenly, then you can just not do this step. So you see what has happened? Yeast has gotten activated. Suddenly this is nice and frothy because of the activation of yeast, and it's holding its structure because of flour. Yeah, so that's the basic idea of activating yeast, giving it food, so suddenly it springs back to life. That's about it. Yeah. Now, if you're making a classic Lucknowi Sheermal, because you have equal quantities of ghee, milk and flour, remember, you would not need to add yeast because there's just so much ghee in it. The leavening will happen because of the layering of the ghee. I'm going to add a little bit of yogurt, milk, ghee. Now, this kneading needs to happen very patiently, right? For 2 reasons. Normally, you would add all the ghee at one go, right? In this case, you're going to add it twice. And that's why I'm saying kneading is a very, very patient job here, because you don't want to overwater your dough because there's ghee that's going to go later. and you don't want to keep it too tight, otherwise the yeast won't be able to react. The dough needs to be slightly runny and a little difficult to manage. So if you see the dough, it is just about handleable. So don't rush with the kneading and don't rush with putting too much liquid and regret later. Now the second lot of ghee. Now, while it looks like a lot, I have not added more than 2.5 tablespoons of ghee. I've added 1.5 tablespoons earlier and 1 tablespoon later, right? Any rich bread that you make, whether it's a German stollen or a Lucknowi Sheermal, remember, the more the fat, the less the rise. Yeah? Yeast finds it difficult to work in heavy circumstances that get created with fat. Simply put. I think I've explained everything. Now all I need to do is just put the dough away. Cover it with a wet muslin cloth. And now you need to leave it at a warm place for at least a half an hour. Like you saw the rise in the yeast in the starter, you'll see a rise in the yeast in the bread. That is the time to take it out, knead it again, flatten it out, make the sheermals, glaze them, and leave them again for 10 minutes. This goes to a warm place near the oven. And now we wait. Beautiful. You see this? The leavening, the net, the yeast has done its job. Now what we've got to do is, we've got to take the dough and knock it back. Yes, knock it back. All the hard work and we knock it back. Now we don't have to worry because you know for sure that the yeast is active, it has done its job. After knocking back, it's going to come back, spring back again, right? So now we take the dough, we cut it into approximately this size. Ideally, you'd spread it with the hand. The dough is supposed to be runny, right? So you got to spread it with the hand. Not too thin, not too thick. So a sheermal in Lucknow will always look something like this. With this piece of bread which seems like it's torn. And there's a reason to it. The reason was, when sheermal was first made in Lucknow, the Nawab of Lucknow took a bite of it and then he just fell in love. The bite that he took left the sheermal looking like this. And in the honor of the Nawab, in the first bite that he took, all sheermals in Lucknow, even today, have the piece taken out of them. Fascinating story, right? You'll always get stories from a Lucknow boy. Now, because it's going to rise, it's going to sort of spread out. So you press it down with your fingers, much like you do to a focaccia. It's amazing how if you leave the dough for some time, it starts listening to you. So here's the saffron water. So I've already added rose water to the saffron water. Now it will do two things. One is, when we are proving it again, this glaze on top will not let our bread dry out. And the second thing that it will do for us is obviously give that richness, that sheen, that royal rich look. Some people also add a little bit of milk on the glaze. If you'd like, you do a little bit of milk. Some people also add a little bit of egg in the glaze. Yeah, egg also gives a lot of richness. If you want, you can do a saffron, milk, egg and a sugar glaze. That works beautifully. So this again, before it goes to the oven, you gotta give it 15 to 20 minutes to rise, to sort of come back to life, and then it'll go into the oven. Also, when you're putting it into the oven, if you do not have a combi oven which allows for a little bit of steam, put a small bowl of water in your oven so it gives enough moisture for the bread not to get dry. And here it goes. We'll wait for 15. The oven is preset to 200. I'm going to bring it down actually. So the most basic formula is, the richer the bread, the lower the temperature, right? The more fat you put in your cake or bread, the lower the temperature. And 200 is the optimum. So you go a little bit above 200 if the bread has no fat in it, and you start going down if the bread or the cake has a lot of fat in it. Simple. The richer the bread, the lower the temperature. Okay, so while the bread is doing its bit, let's do a little bit more. Let's make an interesting chutney that's also from Lucknow. It has Persian roots. It's a walnut chutney with green chilies. You know, that's why I love the 17 centimeter office knife. You sort of don't have to think as to what you're going to cut. Whether it's a walnut, you'll pick it up. Whether it's a pumpkin, you can pick it up and not be afraid. That is the true hallmark of an all-purpose knife. So basically, if you got nothing, don't worry, because you got the 15 centimeter Victorinox office knife. At least I do, if you haven't gotten it already. Here goes a little bit of garlic. Garlic adds warmth. For any winter recipe, a little bit of raw garlic always adds warmth. See, same knife, many uses. And crushed black pepper. What you're looking for is the kick of the chili, the calm of the mint, the warmth of the garlic, the texture of the walnut, and the richness of good full-fat yogurt. So it's time to remove the muslin cloth and get ready to bake the breads. 180 degrees, preheated oven. And now we wait. Approximately 15 minutes, but do check after 12 and also give it one more brushing after 12. And we're sorted. That's about it. You know, while we often speak about knives, and I often speak about knives, we don't often speak about chopping boards. And I think a good chopping board is actually as essential as a good knife. You know why? Because if the chopping board uses a material that is really tough, the blades of the knife tend to get damaged, the knives tend to get blunt faster. If the chopping board is too soft, then all the food particles go in, while washing the moisture goes in, it is a hygiene hazard. A good chopping board has to have a material that is not too soft, not too hard, just about soft enough for that 2 microns of the blade to go in without damaging it. You know, I remember when I was 20 odd years old, I worked with a very good butchery chef and I never saw him sharpening the knife. I mean, it's a basic routine. When you enter the butchery, the first thing you do is sharpen your knife. When you come back from lunch, the first thing you do is sharpen your knife. He never sharpened his knife. And I asked him what was the trick. He said, good chopping boards. They don't let my knife go blunt. Who would have thought? Such a lovely rise, huh, the bread has. Time for another glaze. A little bit of ghee on top. And now we wait. I'd say 5 more minutes and we're almost there. At this stage, a lot of people would sprinkle a little bit of rock sugar or mishri on top, or even some granulated sugar, just for texture and to give that kick of sugar somewhere in between. If you want, you can do that. I don't like my sheermal too sweet. Lucknow doesn't like its sheermal too sweet, so I'm not going to do that. If you want, you could. And now we wait. This is the most difficult wait. When you know that the food's come out awesome and you still have to wait. Now, some people would still sprinkle a little bit of ghee and a little bit of saffron water on it. And I am one of those some people. You could also sprinkle some milk if you want for richness. See, while sheer is the milk, you know, whether it's sheer khurma, sheer brunch, sheer means milk in Persian. Mal in this case is ghee. So you cannot have a sheermal without ample amounts of milk and ghee. Now we allow it to cool. Once it cools, it's going to leave the bottom and it's going to be easy to pull out. Not like really cool down, but just give it 2 minutes. Like I said, ideally, you'd bake this in an iron tandoor because the richer breads don't really work in the clay tandoor. The richer the bread, the more temperature it needs, and those temperatures only come with the iron tandoor. Here we've just replaced the iron tandoor with the oven. Works perfectly. If you still think it's not working as well, you should preheat your trays. So if you preheat your baking trays, then you'll get even better results if you think your bread's not fluffy enough or not rich enough or it's falling flat. Preheat your trays and you'll get even better results. This is stunning. Reminds me of home. You know, you could do the same dip with flax seeds. So instead of walnuts, you could just add flaxseed. Look at this. Looks rich. The Nawabs piece is already there. And here we go. While I'm extremely tempted to take a bite, but I'm obviously not the Nawab. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you that I'm going to be back with more recipes, and not necessarily from Lucknow, but from other cities of India, because we are here to discover the iconic dishes of India in India in 21 recipes. I'll see you again.